Good morning. Welcome to the presentation. It's entitled Rating Scale Assessment of Child Psychopathology, and my name is Randy Kamphaus. I'm a professor and dean of the College of Education at the University of Oregon. I'm also co-author of the Behavior Assessment System for Children, 3rd edition. For many of you who are viewing this presentation, you may be using a version created in America, in Canada, in Germany, in Scandinavia, in France, and Spain, and you may not be aware that the BASC system has been under development for approximately 30 years. So in this 3rd edition, we continue to make improvements in the BASC. It was released in the United States in 2015, but we have learned many lessons over these 3 decades. And all of our mistakes have been made with previous editions of the BASC, and we continue to make improvements with every edition. So if you have used the 1st edition of the BASC that was released in 1992 or the 2nd edition in 2004, this edition includes numerous improvements. Approximately 30% of the items are new. The content validity is improved. It's a very different and we think improved edition of the behavior assessment system for children. So let's begin with some of the assumptions that underlie the BASC. And these are very important assumptions because as a user of the BASC, when you're interpreting the results, these assumptions will help explain why the BASC scores may agree with other information that you may have about a child or why they might disagree. So let's begin. Content validity improves clinical scale interpretation. One of the reasons why Cecil Reynolds and I created the BASC system is because we simply found other rating scales too difficult to interpret. The scales were too complex. We found, for example, that many of the scales in use at the time in the mid-1980s had titles representing 2 constructs. For example, anxiety and depression were the name of the same scale. There were also scales named schizoid anxious. And because scales had multiple names, we were not sure how to interpret them. So if you have a high score on an anxiety/depression scale, what does that mean? Are there depression problems? Are there anxiety problems? Are there problems in both areas? Also, it was quite uncommon. It was quite common because of the way the MMPI was developed and other personality scales were developed post-World War II to have the same item as an indicator of 2 different constructs. In other words, it was not uncommon to have the same item on 2 different scales. So for example, the item worry. I tend to worry. Well, on some scales that was on the anxiety scale, on some it was on the depression scale, and on some it was on both scales. And so we decided that the primary problem in rating scale assessment was an overdependence on factor analysis and overdependence on empirical methods. And if we blindly followed the factor loadings in creating scales, we tended to create item content that, in all honesty, didn't make a lot of sense. It looked to us like some of those factor analytic assignments of items to scales were probably influenced by too much measurement error. So we took the opposite approach with the BASC. So instead of starting with factor analysis and trying to create scales, we did the opposite. We started by creating scales based upon strong evidence of content validity by first reviewing the literature on normal child development, child psychopathology, and creating item pools for each scale. Then we checked the accuracy of our item placements with factor analysis. By taking a theoretical content validity approach first and using factor analysis second, we found, for example, that it was very easy to differentiate schizoid or schizotypal from anxious, or anxiety from depression, or hyperactivity from conduct problems. We know all these constructs correlate very highly, but at the same time, if we have common item content, or we have item content that doesn't make sense on some of these scales, they're very difficult to interpret. So if you see differences between BASC results, say parent ratings of a child's depression, and another scale that has a combined anxiety and depression scale, this could be the reason for the difference. Our depression scale is intended and created and has evidence to suggest that it only assesses depression. And our anxiety scale has considerable evidence to suggest that it only assesses anxiety. So this is a very important assumption, and we hope, and we've been told by psychologists over the last couple of decades, that it helps them interpret the results because the scales have better evidence of content validity.